Welcome back from lunch, everyone. You may have read in the forum agenda that there is research suggesting a massive change in the workforce, where around 15%, that's 400 million or so people, will lose their jobs due to automation. The potential impact of that is huge, as you can imagine. So we ask what can be done about it. We'll explore that as the issue we're having in this session entitled The Future of the Labour and Education Markets. And the moderator leading an excellent panel is the General Manager of BTS Education here in Kazakhstan, Sayassat Nurbek. Please give him and his panel a warm welcome.
Thank you, Riz. It's always a great experience to be at Eurasian Media Forum. And I remember there were several sessions on future jobs and future skills and future labor market before in previous sessions, but they were light ones. They were small and short. And that we have today a proper session on future of jobs and future of labor market is a sign that this issue is becoming more and more important. We have an excellent area of speakers today, an excellent panel of experts joining us today regarding this very, very big issue, which is now, I would arguably presume would become one of the top 3 or top 5 issues to any government, any international organization in the world. Instead of introducing all the speakers, I'll start, introducing them one by one to keep the favor. And we have clear 2 groups today with us. One of kind of a macro level futurologists, experts on labor market policies, experts who've been doing some in-depth research on changing landscape of labor force and labor markets, on like Dmitry Sudakov with us, a long-time partner, long-time friend, who is the head of the Atlas of New Jobs and Skills in Russia, or Daniel Susskind from Oxford University is here with us. So my very first question is this really a big issue we were trying to discuss today? Is it really on agenda like one of the top crucial issues for governments? Daniel, you were deep in enemies council. You were with the UK government. In one of your interviews you've given recently, when you were discussing your latest book, The Future Without Work, you said, well, the reason I wrote this book is because governments are not taking the issue seriously. So is it really a big issue, or should be a big issue for governments, international organizations, United Nations, or regional governments? Daniel?
I think absolutely. Every day we hear stories of systems and machines that are taking on tasks and activities that until recently we thought only human beings alone could ever do. Making medical diagnoses and driving cars, drafting legal contracts and designing buildings, composing music and writing news reports. What does all of this mean for the vast majority of us for whom our job is our main, if not our only, source of income? And you're exactly right. I wrote my most recent book, A World Without Work, because I don't think we're taking seriously enough the threat of technological change in the world of work. But just to be clear, I don't think that what we're approaching is some technological big bang after which we wake up and find the robots have taken all the jobs. That's very unlikely to happen. Work is going to remain for some time to come. What I worry about is a more gradual problem, that as we move through the 21st century, unless we act now, more and more people are going to find themselves unable through work to make the sorts of contributions that they might have hoped or expected to make in the 20th century, given the education they have, given the background they're from. So it's a more gradual challenge, I think, but I don't think it's any less consequential for those who find themselves affected by it.
Thank you. And I'd like to remind that Daniel Susskind is a visiting fellow teaching at the University of Oxford and King's College.
That's right, yes, King's College London, yeah.
And I was really, I'm a big fan of your work, and My second issue, what governments do about it. And I'd like to address Dmitry Sudakov, who, as I said, is a old friend, a mentor, a brother in arms. And we did a wonderful project last year called the Atlas of New Skills and Jobs in Kazakhstan, which is an attempt to create a research framework, a very applied research framework in seeing and forecasting how the labor market will change in the next 5-10 years in Kazakhstan. We've come up with 9 priority sectors of economy, and now the Atlas is used in 3 major issues. 1 is forecasting labor market, 2, building a career advisory service for high school students, and 3, upgrading the curricula for the professional vocational education institutions and higher education institutions. But Dmitry, getting back to you, do you have a sense that the framework you've built in partnership with Skolkovo Business School and the International Labour Organization, which was quite successfully launched in several countries like Vietnam and in South Africa and in Russia, now in Kazakhstan, do you think it could get a very applicable tool, very down-to-earth instrument, toolkit for the governments to deal with all the big issues, new technology wave, changing the landscape of labor market?
Well, thank you, Sayassat. I'm glad to hear you, glad to see all of you guys. And it's not the question I'm really ready to answer, because actually we were addressing, and when we were preparing Atlas, we were making it in order to address this issue. Actually, we understand that the whole structure, the whole idea behind how all this story of creating new professionals, educating new professionals is very well. I can't say it corrupted, but it's rather it's an old style. It's an industrial style. Well, when you prepared specialists for a huge economic machine, and now we understand that all these details are wasted much rapidly than the person himself. Actually, that's the problem. So we need to change the whole approach. So we cannot more prepare a person for exact workplace in the economy, because actually everything will change, and we see it not with youngsters. They are quite ready for the future, from my point of view, but for the elder people, for example, people 40, 45 years old who grew up when they thought, okay, I finished the, college, so I graduated university, and I am ready for the whole life. It is not. So in 40 or 45 years, this person finds himself in a strange new world, rapidly changing, and he or she is not prepared for these changes. So it's really a problem. So the whole idea of education should change. Whether it is possible, it's a good question, but still it should be a multilateral collaboration with government, with business, with education. So in order to create like this ecosystem supporting lifelong learning, lifelong re-educating, because actually you cannot, even if now you are, say, a good programmer using, JavaScript, Python, Ruby, whatever. If you're a good data scientist today, it doesn't mean that in 10, 15 years, you will stay on the same position. You either move forward or you will stay behind for a long time, for forever, actually. So that's the problem, and that's the issue we need to address. And actually, the whole idea of Atlas is not about identifying exact future jobs, so to call them. The idea is to show that you always need to run faster than the economy. You need to be prepared much more than for more changes, because actually all these changes will grow up.
Well, thank you, Dmitry. So, and great minds think alike, they say, and in our joint research, the major conclusion we've come up with, which is very obvious, which is on the surface, is that the education system is the sick man of the Europe, right? It has to adopt, it has to run twice as fast as the changes on labor market. So it's not the Ministry of Manpower, Ministry of Labor, it's the Ministry of Education, which should be on the scene, which should be focusing on addressing the changes and challenges. Thank you, Dmitry. This is a very important point. Now, we have Perttu Pölönen with us today, who is a futurologist, an entrepreneur, an inventor, trained in classical music. But Perttu, what I would like to ask, I mean, you've been studying at the Singularity University. You've been at a top, kind of a future studies spearheading research center. Then you went to establish an edtech company in Myanmar, right? So, like, from the first world to the third world, so to speak, right? Quoting Lee Kuan Yew. What was your experience? Because this is the big issue as well. Like, if the developed countries, like states like UK, are ringing the bell, like, guys, we're not ready. How do the third world, the developing or underdeveloped countries would address the issue? What is the striking difference, or what are the key major issues you've seen with your experience in Myanmar? Oh, you have to switch on. Yep, thank you.
Yes, thank you. And first of all, thank you for the whole organizing committee for having me. But yes, I went from Silicon Valley to Myanmar, and it taught a lot. First of all, in Silicon Valley, as you all know, the thinking is that the technology will solve all the problems. And in Myanmar, I saw that technology probably doesn't solve all the problems. So there are other nuances as well to take into consideration. But there is something that the developing nations can teach to developed nations. And one of them is this, and I'll tell you a story. One time I went to a school in countryside of Yangon, Myanmar, and the children who got in, they started playing with cards. And when I went to see closer what they are, it wasn't a regular card deck, but rather the subject of chemistry was transformed into these flashcards. So they were learning molecules, basic things with the cards. And after a while, the teacher said something, and the students take their phones out and start scanning the cards, which means that whatever it is on the card is get transformed onto a 3D model on the phone. So the molecule, you could rotate it, you could zoom it, you could have the link to Wikipedia, YouTube, whatnot. And when I turned to my friend and asked, how is this possible that in Myanmar, that has a lot of work still to be done, you're doing something so radical, something so new. I haven't seen this anywhere, and I'm coming from Finland, and I thought we are good at this. So how were you able to do this? And she said to me that, remember, Perttu, we are in Myanmar, which means we don't have anything to lose. The system in place is so bad that all the teachers and parents and educators are open to new ideas, and they want to try new things out because that might help them. And when I got back to Finland, I started to think that, what about the developed nations? There's so much to lose because many things are great. So is there a risk that we don't have the courage to try new things out because we are afraid that we might lose something? And in this way, I see that there is actually a big opportunity for the places who are coming a bit behind to take huge leaps forward, whereas the developed nations are stuck in the things that have previously worked. And I think right now, more important than ever, is to ask ourselves, is our education system really successful? Because I would say, if it is, it means we did the right decisions decades ago. But how we're doing right now, we don't know. We're going to see it in the years to come. So maybe there is something that we could learn as for risk-taking from the developing nations.
Right. And the pandemic, you say, was a great equalizer, basically. You know, it hit all the education system equally bad and equally heavy. Now, most of the governments switching back to offline, saying, "Oof, bad dream." Right. But Finland's education system is kind of regarded as one of the best case scenarios. What are the Finnish education system is doing now? Are they going back to normal, or are they trying to adapt to new normal?
Well, by large, going back to normal, as I think it is in the most parts of the world, which brings up the question, you know, we know that education system is slow to change. And if a global pandemic is not enough to bring changes, then what needs to happen for us to really make radical big changes? And there were some students, even in Finland, who wanted their teachers to really try something new. You know, because we're now in weird times, try something new to us, like experiment with us. So I think even the students had this kind of attitude that we want to try out new things. But yeah, I think by large, going back to normal.
Okay, good. Well, I have to pass from macro level. Let's just go down a little bit. One thing we've identified that education has to change. The education model has to change. The old industrial model is not working anymore. And there's a big quest, there's a big search started by many organizations like OECD, for example, Education 2030 project, which is now in the fifth, sixth year of its experimental trying to find new model education. So I'd like to address Dr. Salah Khalil. You were in education. You founded Alexandria Trust, the Macat International. You talk a lot about changing the education content and switching to critical thinking, to creative thinking. How do you think education content and methodology should change so that we address these big new issues, which are radical and accelerating? The speed of change is so high that instead of trying to adopt, we need to find something else that the majority of students going out of education system have the inner ability and some basic skills of adaptability to do this new change. Dr. Salah? And then, Tanmay, I'll go back to you, look at dessert. Because with your experience, we'll talk about the very practical skills.
Thank you, Sayassat. Well, look, I'm going to start initially at just saying how important this issue of skills and education is. I saw in your introduction, you're quoting 400 million people could be at risk. And the latest reports from Korn Ferry, from the World Economic Forum, from Accenture, says that if 85 million people do not, out of the global workforce, which is 3.7 billion people, if 85 million people do not get some form of skilling, upskilling, or reskilling to adjust the skills that they have currently from the old economy to the skills of the new economy, the estimated cost of this will exceed $8.5 trillion. Now, we all know that the World Bank and the International Labour Organization has said that it estimates that 30% of the global workforce, which is almost 1 billion people, are in vulnerable employment. So the problem is not 85 million. The problem is closer to 1 billion. And it's not going to cost 8.5 trillion. It's going to be something like 50 or 60 trillion. So this is something that is in magnitude equivalent to 9/11, the 2008 financial crisis, and COVID combined, even more. So it's a huge problem. And I do not think that any country can think about this problem in isolation. So for example, if Kazakhstan wants to think about this, they have to first see what's happening on a global level before trying to solve put a strategy for what happens on a national level. Now that aside, the main question comes, okay, then what are those skills? And how do we prepare for them, right? Well, the central issue in skills will be the intelligence that powers the new economy versus the intelligence that powers the old economy. For years, human intelligence had been powering almost everything in our lives. We have recently seen artificial intelligence come in and grow at an extraordinary rate. And depending who you ask about the future of intelligence, and some people might say, if you look at post-humanism, for example, some people might say that, human beings are like any other species and they're subject to extinction. In fact, not some people. Cambridge, Oxford, Berkeley, and Princeton have set up institutes for the risk to human existence. So this is not just an academic debate. This is something that is beyond an academic debate. Now, if you consider that the biggest risk to human beings is being replaced by machines, then you must understand what kind of skills do human beings need to invest in that cannot be replaced by machines. And if you look at the neocortex in the brain, which represents almost 50% of the brain size, you will see three basic functions. The first is memory, and we all know what artificial intelligence has done in terms of human intelligence and memory. There is no competition. Perception, which is another one that's growing. You're now seeing facial recognition. You're seeing all kinds of different things, and we're slowly losing that battle as well. The only area that remains in the brain is actually cognitive functions led by critical thinking. So that is the area where it will take a much longer time for artificial intelligence to catch up, and there is a very good chance that we turn our fear of artificial intelligence into a reality of augmented intelligence, which is a combination of human intelligence and artificial intelligence used subject to context. In certain contexts, your artificial intelligence will be 80, 90%, and human intelligence 10%. In other contexts, you'll have the reverse situation. If this is the case, then the focus should not be on on job families or doing a directory of jobs. The focus should be, how do we understand critical thinking? What is this critical thinking that has been in universities for years? If you look at this issue and you really focus on it, which is what we have done in our work, we spent 12 years researching this topic. And we found that actually, in order to turn critical thinking into something that could enter the educational landscape and enter the workforce as well, you will have to turn it into skills. And we did a research that showed that critical thinking is actually made of a number of skills, including problem solving, analysis, creative thinking, interpretation, evaluation, and reasoning. And these skills work in concert and in sequence to create a thinking toolbox that can really help you be extremely flexible and in line with all the serious changes that are happening in terms of demographic changes, in terms of globalization, in terms of the effects of COVID-19, economic and otherwise, digital transformation, the new economy that's going to look more like an on-demand economy. So basically mirroring the work of management consultancy, where permanent jobs will be something of the past and more like project-based tasks will be the future. So I would really urge that we focus on the skills that power the future. I have one last thing to say about the education side. I mean, you said the paradigm, the Industrial Revolution paradigm is gone, whereby everyone was focused on a single subject. So instead of that the education is based on a T model, where the top T is the subject and the STEM is how deep you go into a subject. And the Industrial Revolution paradigm is narrow and deep. And the knowledge economy is wide and shallow, right? But the new economy is both wide and deep. And just to give a simple example, a practical example, how much would it cost if you want to take your son or your daughter from kindergarten to doing multiple PhDs or multiple masters in the best universities and schools in the world? Exceeds $1 million. This system is broken. You cannot apply it. Maybe, Finland is a great case, but the numbers are not like Egypt or China or India. We need a really serious look at this, and to try to do that, you will need to look at paradigm shifts that are realistic and in line with the future.
Thank you very much. I gave you just a little bit more time because the thoughts were really, and there's almost a perfect transition to you, Tanmay, because Dr. Salah was talking about artificial intelligence. And let me introduce our prodigy from Canada, Tanmay Bakshi. Your father taught you coding and programming when you were 5 years old, Tanmay. I've really carefully watched your TEDx talks. I was really fascinated by what Dr. Salah said, the depth of your thinking and also the width of the broadness of your understanding of very crucial issues. Do you really think AI and machine learning, the algorithms, will cast out some of these very basic, very intricate, very complicated cognitive abilities that humans have? Because you are in this thing, you were with IBM, and you're an avid researcher of AI and machine learning. And a very particular question, a very specific question to you as well. Do you think programming should be a basic skill? Because a lot of parents are now kind of asking, you being an example of your father's will at 5 years old. Tanmay?
I mean, first of all, thank you very much, Sayassat. I mean, this is, I'm really excited to get to share my thoughts here. And I mean, sort of starting off with what you mentioned around AI and machine learning. I mean, to begin, the thoughts that I've been hearing on this panel so far, I think, are personally incredible, right? Especially, what Dmitry, what Dr. Salah mentioned about education and sort of AI, and particularly how AI. Really, we should be taking a look at how we can be applying it as augmented intelligence. That really resonates with me. That's something that I really like to drive across and that I think is really important to think about. And in particular, something that I feel like a lot of people don't realize is that machine learning is a lot more, and artificial intelligence is a lot more limited than a lot of people think in a lot of ways, right? There is a certain level of flexibility to it, and we can do some incredible things with it, right? And one of the examples I like to point to is GPT-3, OpenAI's incredibly large neural network that can generate text super realistically and do all kinds of incredible tasks. And now they've even extended it to code, so you can write code with neural networks with OpenAI. And a lot of people, for example, when these neural networks were released, went ahead and said, hey, this neural network is going to replace songwriters and journalists and developers in all kinds of different professions. And that was sort of like the number one headline you would see about the deep learning industry in that week when they released that. And personally, when I see these kinds of headlines, I think it's really important to realize that creativity, right? The process that we humans go through to think of new thoughts, to come up with new ideas, that's something that we can't replicate with machine learning today. And doing so would require a very fundamental re-architecting of what artificial intelligence means, right? Not just, how can we build better machine learning, really going back to the drawing board and re-implementing things, at a very, very ground level, which we aren't doing today. So creativity is sort of that line that I see as what differentiates, humans and what computers can do. And I feel like creativity also, has a bit of a connotation to it with, like, for example, art, but really creativity is that general purpose process of us coming up with new ideas. And, that could be, humans inventing the wheel. It could be developers solving a problem through code. It could be a teacher answering a student's question, right? These are all examples of creativity where we need to come up with new information or new ways of thinking of things, right? And so what I think is really important to keep in mind is that fundamentally, machine learning is limited in the sense of it doesn't have that creativity. I remember a tweet from Andrej Karpathy, who is a super incredible AI researcher, and one of his tweets is, by posting GPT generated text, we're polluting the data for its future versions. And, that's really interesting to me because that makes sense, right? GPT is trained on the internet. By generating text from it and posting that on the internet, we're polluting its future data, right? We're making its future versions worse. And it just sort of goes to show that, with neural nets like this, they might look great today, but you start using it to, for example, generate the rest of the internet, and nothing's ever going to change. We're never going to have new, mannerisms, new language, new slang, new trends. It's just going to be the same stuff over and over again because, again, these neural networks are mathematically, fundamentally trained to do what's always been done. They're not good at that sort of critical thinking, as Dr. Salah mentioned. That's not what they're trained for. And so I think the future really is that sort of hybrid of humans being able to apply their creativity, dealing with edge cases, dealing with coming up with new ideas, and having that sort of perception, as Dr. Salah mentioned, and dealing with memory, having that dealt with by machine learning and AI systems. And getting to your second question really quickly about, should programming be that sort of basic skill that people learn? I mean, I feel like programming and writing code is a lot more than just writing code, right? I was working with one of my friends the other day, trying to teach them a new programming language, and they'd never coded in this language before. But despite that fact, after just a couple of hours, they picked it up practically instantly, and that's because they've had experience in the past coding in other languages. And even if they've never coded in this one before, all that really matters is that you understand the fundamental technical problem solving, right? How do you take this abstract problem that's given to you, break it up into smaller components, take a look at how you can solve them algorithmically and tie them up together, right, into an elegant technical package? That is creativity. That is problem solving. So what I think is important is not necessarily that, hey, everybody needs to learn how to code, and that's what everybody's going to be doing in the future. But I think it's important to introduce it, or at least the concepts behind it, at a young enough age, so that students that are passionate about it, first of all, have the ability to say, hey, I enjoy that. I want to dig into this deeper in the future. But also, we are able to sort of impart that general purpose problem solving and sort of logical thinking capability into children, into the youth. So I think it is important to introduce at a young age. I think it's important to know, just because of how much of our lives are sort of powered by technology. But it's absolutely not something that everybody needs to do in the future, right? It's important. It can help us create more efficient processes, but it's not going to be an absolutely critical, this is what everybody needs to be doing sort of field. So overall, I think it's really that future of a hybrid, as Dr. Salah mentioned, of human intelligence and working with machine learning as an augmenter, apart from the industries or specific job roles that will be replaced that don't require that kind of human creativity, and also working towards introducing code and introducing these sort of computing concepts at a young enough age.
Thank you, Tanmay. So basically, we agree with Dr. Salah on the thought that the future, the AI is not a threat. It's a partner, basically. I mean, we have to integrate it into the future development. Well, there was time for kind of a longer interactions. Let's keep it shorter so we don't lose the dynamic. I have a very quick question to Daniel, Perttu, and Dmitry. Say you have a magic wand, right? You have a genie in a bottle. You have one wish that can be granted. What 1 or 2, 3 particular things you would change having your superpowers in labor market or education policies in your particular countries or anywhere in the world?
So I'm going to take 3. And I think it's come out from the conversation so far that there are, in thinking about the future of education, there are 3 different parts to this. The first is what it is that we're teaching. What skills and what capabilities do we think are important? And again, this has been reflected in the comments. Really, there are 2 things here. Either you are trying to teach people to compete with these systems and machines in some way, whether it's through creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, interpersonal skills, social interaction. There's a whole set of faculties that at the moment are quite difficult to automate. There's another path, though, which is to train people to build these systems and machines. And we've heard elements of that already. Teaching people to design, not only in a practical sense, but also just to understand how these systems and machines work and the nature of the problem solving. I think that's part of education then. We need to reform what it is that we're teaching. But it's not just the what. And this has also, I think, come out in the conversation. It's also the how we teach. The pandemic has been a real wake-up call in how we can use technology to teach people in very different ways. Overnight, not only telemedicine and virtual courts, but online education became the norm. And we have to learn from the last 12 to 18 months what has and has not worked well in the educational setting in terms of using technology. So I think there's the what we teach, I think there's the how we teach. There's also, though, and this is the third thing, the when we teach. And it's an observation that you made earlier, which is that there's a sense that at the moment, education is the sort of thing you do at the start of your life. That's when you do it, that's when you spend the time and the money. You build up what an economist would call your human capital, your stock of skills and capabilities, and then as you move through life, you draw down on that capability that you've built up. And I think that's a big mistake. You know, there is inevitably a huge amount of uncertainty about the future. What jobs are going to be there for people to do, what tasks and activities are going to be valuable, and what skills and capabilities will turn out to be the ones that we are best placed to do. And the best response to that uncertainty is flexibility. You know, a willingness to retrain and reskill throughout life with the same kind of intensity and seriousness, both financial and also, you know, attitudinal, that you might have approached education at the start of your life. So I think if we're going to think seriously about education, we've got to tackle all three of those aspects: the what we teach, the how we teach, and the when we teach. And that for me is what what a serious set of reforms with respect to education would look like. And I think we've caught a glimpse of that in the various comments and observations that people have made so far.
Brilliant. Perttu?
Yes.
Your mic again.
So I would continue on the how part, because currently I think, yes, we all agree that creativity and the soft skills in general will become more important in the future. But the problem is that those skills, just such as curiosity and compassion and perseverance and so on, are very difficult to measure with the traditional means of testing, right? So we have this problem that we should prepare the students with certain skill sets, but we're still stuck with how we validate somebody's competence. So we need a paradigm shift here. We should focus on things and skills that are quite not concrete in a way. You know, you can make the class play all day and have fun, but then at the end of the day, if somebody asks, you know, what's your perseverance level? You cannot say B+, or you cannot test, you know, somebody's curiosity the same way as you test mathematics or grammatics, where you have right and wrong answers universally. So it is for parents, it is for teachers, it is for all of us to value the invisible, understand that this is key competence even though I cannot get a degree from it. And what was talked earlier is that we need the depth, not only the speed. And right now I think in societies all around the world we value more speed than depth. We want to have results, we want to go forward, but nobody's asking, are we doing the right things? And in this way I would say we need to make the world better, not more effective. And there are two different things. We need to ask, you know, are we succeeding in the right things? Because at the end of the day, the worst thing that can happen is not failure, but rather succeeding in the wrong things. So in some years we notice, oh well, you're wonderful, but you're unemployable. You know? So I think we have to get rid of or not get rid of, but understand that the idea that we look at the numbers all the time, we cannot see the level of passion of teachers in the numbers, but it's still important. We cannot see the level of commitment in numbers, but it's still important. You have to go to a test to drive a car. You have to go to a test to hunt. You don't have any test for raising a child for 20 years. So we need to understand that even though something is not being tested, it's still important and we should really focus on it.
Thank you, that's very important. Dmitry, what important angle?
Okay, thank you so much. It was really very important note from Perttu. I would add something. To me, it seems if I had a magic wand, I would first of all just change the whole pattern in the economy from rent extraction from anything towards, I would say, self-fulfillment and happiness in the end. Because actually, like I have a metaphor, like if you have a, for example, driving navigator, it optimizes either time or the length of your route. And well, and if I want to make a new route, can it help me? No. If I want to make a happy route, no. So we need to change something in the approach. So we should get from money, from everything towards, I don't know, this self-fulfillment and happiness. The second thing to me seems very important, that now we have this like a pendulum moving towards this tech approach. So we really think that all these technologies, new technologies in every sphere, in digital, in genomics, and any sphere, in robotics, can help us live better. And it's true, but we need just move towards human touch. That's really important thing. Like creativity, yes. Systems thinking, yes. But we need to understand that there's a huge sector of economy where we were coming because of the human touch. I'm coming to my barber because I like him and I like talking to him. And we have lots of other examples, like small cafes, coffee shops, and all that stuff. So we need to move towards this human touch. And the other thing is the third one, for me, it seems the hardest and maybe the most important thing, is the story about what we call the new adulthood. So it's the, today's what is called adult people, for example, my age, for me, are not really adult, because actually they're living like a train on rails. So they're just traveling across their life, expecting that someone will pay them salary, someone will teach them, and so on. And what we understand now in 21st century, that the person needs to take his life in his own hands or her own hands. So it requires us totally new approach towards ourselves. We need to become really responsible for the whole world, for ourselves, for our families, for our countries, and so on. So, and it's totally new story. And I'm really not sure that it's, well, for me, it should be the key point, but I'm not sure that, well, for example, any country is ready for that. You can take Russia, you can take Kazakhstan, you can take Finland, or doesn't matter. I'm not really sure that these countries, any country in the world, are prepared. These was mentioned that critical thinking should be a new literacy. Do you think that today's political leaders are ready for the 100% people in their country with critical thinking? Sure, I'm doubting, but we need to change that. So if I have this magical wand, so I just use that.
Well, my attempts to take matters to kind of a practical, down-to-earth level have failed, obviously. Dmitry has taken the issue to a whole another level. Is the rethinking humanity, rethinking what is human, actually, really the purpose of life? How do we deal with our nature? And contraposition and comparison to this new machinery and technology is actually bringing in this big new question: is what is being, what is it being a human? What it takes to be a human? And is it the humanity, our human side, is our best advantage, basically? But I'd like to address really quick question to Dr. Salah and Tanmay, to you. Again, you have the magical wand, right? What would you change in curriculum? I mean, I'm trying to, and there was a great issue, Perttu raised a great issue. Yes, creativity, critical thinking, great things, I mean, human things. But from the point of view of policymaker, let's say a school principal, how do I introduce, whole school creative thinking, critical thinking program? How do I measure it? How do I deal with it? How do I make sure that, let's say, 89% of my students going out of the school are critical thinking at critical minimum level, right? What should be changed in procedures, policies, from your point of view? And Tanmay, yeah, both of you. Dr. Salah? Well, we can, yeah, Tanmay, we'll give you, yeah, you go first.
Sure. This time. Sure, all right. So, I mean, really to start off, I think it's really hard to say what to add to a curriculum, because in order to fit to what I think is important for the education system to look like, I mean, as we discussed previously, I think it needs to change at a more fundamental level. However, I've been lucky enough to have the experience of like going to, you know, schools and universities and colleges across the globe and getting to take a look at how they do things there, as well as like specific institutions and like academies, and sort of get some experience as to how education happens in different places. Some of my favorite experiences include going to a school in Amsterdam, and while I was there, I learned that one of the ways they sort of work with their children is not only do they have, of course, their regular classic subjects and tests and things, but they also have effectively these sorts of sessions where they give their students sort of higher level projects to work on, saying things like, you know, here's a bunch of infrastructure, maybe here's some Raspberry Pis, or here's some, you know, technology. Let's build this thing. Let's solve this problem. And instead of, you know, hand holding the students through every step, saying, you know, now let's open this IDE and write this code. Don't worry about what it does. Just run it. There you solve the problem. Instead of like, you know, making them feel like they've done something, they actually give them that sort of creative freedom to say, you know, get some experience, get some hands-on, you know, practical, real-world experience doing things. And I personally think that that really is, so far, one of the most effective ways I've seen of introducing these sorts of skills to kids. I mean, personally, you know, I've been homeschooled, and what that means for me is that, you know, my parents gave me the resources and really an environment, particularly, in which I could learn the way I wanted to, right? And I personally love learning in a hands-on and practical manner, right? So like for past 6 years, as I mentioned, I've been working on like different AI machine learning algorithms in a variety of different fields, like biometric authentication, you know, compiler technology for IBM, healthcare, and you know, I've been doing this with companies like Google and Walmart and Apple, and you know, as I've done that, I've not only gained that experience of, you know, this is how I write technology and write software, but also how to learn in an agile method where, you know, tomorrow, if I have a brand new project with some brand new tech I've never worked before, you know, I can pick it up pretty quickly because I've learned how to learn in that sense. And that's something that I've picked up, you know, as I've built things, as I've actually experimented with them in the real world, and seen not only how do I use things, but how do I figure out how to use things too? And, you know, a lot of my friends, for example, unfortunately, they don't have that experience, and they won't get into the industry for another couple of years. So I think that's definitely something that a lot of kids miss out on these days. And I feel like, you know, if we can't, you know, revamp at that fundamental level, what we can do to sort of jerry rig onto today's educational infrastructure is to say, you know, let's take all these things we're teaching kids and let's put it all together into a package where we say, okay, here's our goal, here's something we want to solve, here's something we want to build. Can we achieve this? Can we use the different tools in our toolbox of what we've learned so far to achieve that? Because I think that's really what's going to be important for them in, you know, for example, industries in the future that don't exist yet, right? Is being able to put these things together, do that sort of critical thinking and problem solving.
Basically, Tanmay, you suggest that we use what is called project-based or problem-based learning widely into schools curricula. Okay, I'm itchy to start a debate between Dmitry and Dr. Salah, because Dmitry says, well, critical thinking is not very well accepted by governments. Imagine your whole society being critical thinking society, you know, none of your bills would pass. No. Dr. Salah, what do you...
I think this view...
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think this view of critical thinking is only for a few people, or is scary as a topic, is actually not a very research-based view. In terms, I can simply give one example. In the company that I have created in the UK 12 years ago, we have now signed contracts with 3 countries, including Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Morocco, to develop and measure the critical thinking of north of 1.5 million students. So if these countries, who are, you know, very careful about how to develop, you know, they've recently emerged from the Arab Spring, are going all out into measuring and developing critical thinking and making it part of the curriculum, then I don't know what they're thinking if they're not, if they don't see a benefit in that. That's number one. Number two, on the issue of measuring critical thinking, the literature review is very, very clear that actually the skills can be measured and they can be taught. So that is, since 2011, I'm talking about University of Cambridge, I'm talking about Pearson, all the literature review that you can access online or in academic journals point to two directions, and one is that you need to define critical thinking well. Yes, it can be measured, and yes, it can be taught. In addition to that, we are currently working in our company with OECD to create an international assessment instrument for critical and creative thinking. So even OECD is heading in that direction. So if you look at all this, and you're asking me about a wound that I can wave around and look at, I think the idea of when, how, and what is amazing, but I think why is really important.
Start with why.
Yeah.
It's a great book, by the way. Yeah.
So, why education? There are two basic sort of thoughts on that, and one is education for enlightenment. A lot of people were talking previously about that, hence the liberal arts education and so on, and then we recently started hearing a lot about education for employment. Now, if you're talking education for enlightenment, the basic pillar of that is cutting out bias, challenging bias. Where you identify bias and you basically challenge it. But if you talk about employment, it's actually about the mobilization of bias. So, this is a big conundrum. I think in order to resolve this, and instead of people trying to change education, I mean, we've heard tremendous claims made by large ed tech companies that we're gonna basically transform education, and we're gonna, the big avalanche is coming, and education will change completely, and all the unicorns, which are companies with a valuation greater than $1 billion, are actually either service for a fee for a university, or service as a software for university. Universities are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. And they're the ones that we can use with ministries of higher education and ministries of labor to make this a better, provide better life chances for students who want to grow, who want to build families, who want to make good life choices, wise life choices, without having white hair or without losing their hair, as in my case.
So you say the great promise of EdTech is still not in place. Daniel, you wanted to add something, yeah?
Yeah, just to make perhaps a slightly more controversial comment, which is that I think, many of the observations that we have all made are not particularly radical, and they're not particularly new. In my view, the challenge is often, things like creativity or problem solving or critical thinking, which we've all said are going to be important skills in the future. In my view, the challenge is often actually delivering that in practice. The challenge is often a far more mundane and less exciting question of, well, how do we actually do that? And let me give you an example from home. For some time in the UK, people have spoken about the importance of digital literacy, the importance of trying to get kids introduced to computer science at a young age in different ways. That's the context. A recent survey of computer science teachers in the UK in secondary schools found that many of them had no background in the material. Many of them didn't feel comfortable teaching it. Now, why was that? Well, it wasn't because policymakers didn't recognize the importance of digital skills or digital literacy or teaching people computer science and so on. The problem was that, well, they just didn't really get it. That, look, here was a new subject, computer science, which people were saying was important. And on the existing curriculum, there was this subject called ICT, or Information Communication Technology, where people were taught to use Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Word, or to build a basic website. And they thought, well, both of these things have something to do with technology, so we'll just ask the teachers who used to teach ICT to teach computer science instead. And as a result, the reform wasn't a particular success. Now, I just say all of that because I think some people listening to this might think we've heard some of these ideas before, and I would say I agree with you. The challenge is often actually delivering this stuff in practice, making sure we are introducing the sort of crunchy policies that are going to really ensure, in this particular case, kids get the skills that they need. We often recognize from a sort of priority point of view what matters, but in delivering, we often fall short. And that's one of my concerns about where we currently are in trying to prepare young people for the future of work.
Start with how, you say, and why, when.
Yeah, well, how is a bit different. That how is how it is that we change, think about using technology to change education. This is a broader how in how we actually implement the whole thing in practice, which is difficult but very important.
Well, we have questions coming online, and the very first question is it's kind of a classic. Can robots replace creative professions such as journalists, artists, etc. in the future? So, Perttu, being a futurologist, really quick answer from you, and I will give some floor for Tanmay as well.
What was the word? Can
robots?
Robots.
AI,
right.
robots,
yeah.
technology.
Yes and no, of course. So I would say one of the biggest factors is that humans can give meaning to things. So even though robots could do the things as well, and yes, they can write poems and make symphonies and such, as mentioned before, they cannot tell why they did it. What was the reason behind it? What motivated them? What creates value for other people? So I can give a story. I can tell that I wrote this poem on this mountaintop and I was thinking of my childhood. I can color the background. When somebody else hears this story, they get more out of the poem. So in this way, we humans can give meaning to things. And I think that's one of the things everybody should, figure out. In my own job, how do I bring my personality out? Yes, the computer or the machines can do those tasks, but if you as a human bring something out of yours, like something from your childhood, some personal experience, something humane, then that's the added value that robots couldn't deliver. So I would say that it's good that they take some things out from us because it will force us to become more humane, and that's a good progress. So if we go from agriculture to industrial to information, now would be the human revolution, in my opinion.
Okay, so human touch, purpose and meaning, that's something that technology can't bring to the equation yet.
I would say, or I would ask all of you to answer this question. What can I get from you that I can't get from Google? And then you have to think, well, Google can't look me into the eye. Google can't touch me on the shoulder. Google doesn't have a body language, and Google has all the information but doesn't frankly care, right? And Google, it lacks all of these things. So I think we just have to verbalize what do I have to deliver that any bot or robot or machine cannot give.
Great. Tanmay, you agree with that?
Absolutely. No, I mean, really, if you take a look at art, I mean, the vast majority of the sort of impact that it has, I mean, as mentioned, is precisely that sort of human touch. And this question really hits home for me because just a little while ago, a couple months ago, I was working on a project sort of particularly trying to research the intersection of where machine learning's place is in the world of art. And I feel like there's a huge sort of there's huge potential for using machine learning and artificial intelligence in the world of art and helping creative professionals. But that I believe we haven't even begun to sort of scratch the surface of. And the reason that I think we haven't particularly dug deep into that and sort of started to extract value from machine learning for creative professionals is because we're thinking about it the wrong way fundamentally, right? from the beginning, we have organizations like Google, they've got their Magenta. OpenAI has Jukebox and GPT-3. And the point that these sort of systems are trying to make is, how can we take over as much of the entire artistic process as possible, right? Can we compose an entire song from scratch? Can we write lyrics, sing lyrics from scratch in OpenAI's case, right? And the problem with that is you can't, right? I mean, today's machine learning technology simply doesn't have the level of fidelity to get to things that sound nice, first of all, and also, as we mentioned, it still doesn't have that sort of human touch, and so it loses that extra bit of value that we're able to derive from the sort of meaning and the message and the emotions behind that music. And so I sort of set out on this journey of trying to see, can I build machine learning systems that from the ground up are meant to augment songwriters and can actually help them in their sort of creative process? And I'm glad to say it actually went pretty well. I've been working on a project called Auto Lyricist for a couple of months now. And the idea of the project is, I'm not trying to replace songwriters. Again, that defeats the entire purpose, loses that emotional connection. It loses that sort of depth to music, because a lot of people don't realize how complex art is, right? You could have simple lyrics and you would still need an incredibly deep level of understanding of humans and society in order to come to some sort of meaning with those lyrics. Sometimes you don't come to a meaning. Sometimes it is that sort of raw emotion. And computers simply can't deal with that because of, again, the sort of raw mathematical optimization that we train these neural networks with. As a matter of fact, I'm glad to say that I did actually end up working with a couple of artists on music that was partially written by the Auto Lyricist system, and you can find it on like for example, "Summertime Song" by Claudia Heuser. These sorts of the sort of music is partially written by the Auto Lyricist system. And really, this sort of has two goals here. First of all, if you're a songwriter, how can we help you take that sort of messaging and that sort of emotion that you want to convey and get that across more effectively, more quickly, give you that sort of automated inspiration to eliminate writer's block. But also, what's a really interesting extension of this that I think has a lot of value is, if you have interesting life experiences and stories and emotions that you want to share, but you don't have that songwriting experience, right? That isn't something that you're already great at. Now with this machine learning system, the barrier of entry to that world has now been lowered, right? You can start to share your stories with the world through this sort of musical medium. So I think that machine learning absolutely has a role in the world of, creative professionals and helping them out, but it's not going to replace them, right? Because there's that sort of emotional connection, and then there's also the many layers of abstraction and sort of creativity required to reach a level of like high fidelity, artistic generation with machine learning that I don't see us reaching anytime soon.
Well, in Dr. Salah's words, it was very wide and very in-depth answer. Thank you, Tanmay. I'd like to address the audience. We have about 20 minutes left. If you have any questions to any of our experts on today's panel, please feel free to address them. If not, we will proceed. Oh, I have a... Yes, please. Could you quickly introduce yourself? Right. There's a small button, right? Yes, thank you.
Здравствуйте. Меня зовут Юрий, я из Киева. Знаете, так бывает оказаться в нужное время, в нужном месте. Это дикий случай. Я тут с ребенком, тоже из Киева. Ребенку 23 года. Он закончил в Саутгемптоне университет, бакалавр с отличием, инженер, электрика и электроника. Ну, не воспользоваться тем, что 6 экспертов, которые должны, может быть, по-человечески сказать, вот что делать ребенку 23 лет, идти в магистратуру по своей специальности, идти в экономическую магистратуру, чтобы быть инженером, электриком, но и знать, как двигаются деньги. Сейчас он занимается какое-то время, раз он здесь, то какими-то креативными вещами в Украине, и вот даже попал на этот чудесный форум. Вот. Или найти что-то еще. Он не глупый вроде так. Да, во всяком случае, у нас с женой вечно эта дискуссия. Я говорю, по тебе плачет теплоэнергоцентраль, где он должен работать. Она считает, что в робе после английского университета вроде как грех, пусть идет учиться. Давайте вот обсудим практический вопрос. Вот что делать ребенку и папе?
Отлично, спасибо, Юрий. Можно я быстренько даже коротко перейду? Let me just quickly summarize this. So my name is Yuri, I come from Kiev, Ukraine. I'm here with my son, who is 23 years old, a fresh graduate of Bachelor of Sciences in Electrical Engineering from Southampton University. What do I do as a parent? Should he go to the power plant, put on his working clothes, become an industrial, get some industrial experience, or do something else, continue with his studies, pursue a master's degree? Really quick recommendation, advice to a parent really worried about his kid who's 23 years old.
I had a similar question a couple of years ago in Silicon Valley when I asked Ray Kurzweil, a futurist, what should I go to study? I was 21 back at the time. And maybe he wanted to provoke me a bit, but he answered, well, why would you go to study anything else than art or fine arts? Fine arts or philosophy, sorry. Because everything else will come and go. Of course, you can study coding, you can study this and that, but maybe in some decades, machines will code, maybe the languages we can translate into our earpods. So start with something that helps you throughout your life. And fine arts, philosophy, it's characters, thinking skills that really is useful for you. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Okay, great. Daniel.
I think one observation to make is about the mindset that your son should have when moving through his career. That somewhat paradoxically, this piece of advice might sound a bit paradoxical, but what I would generally advise for anybody who's interested in traditional professional roles, whether it's the sorts you are describing, or if they want to be a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher or accountant or whatever it might be, is still for the first part of their career to pursue the traditional path, go through the traditional institutions, go and work in the traditional organizations, but then be far more agnostic and far more open-minded as you move through your career about where you might then go. I think the idea, and people often say it, but I think it's true, that the idea that we will have, that a young person setting out on their career might have one single career that they proceed through in a relatively linear, deterministic way. I think that is an old model of career progression. I think we now need to be, young people need to be far more open-minded to moving laterally, taking up entirely different opportunities, perhaps enabled by technology as they move through their work. But I do think it's important in those first few years to take the traditional route. And I say this because I think it's quite important that people still learn domain expertise. If they're interested in solving legal problems, they should still train as a traditional lawyer, because that's a great way to find out what the law is all about. If you want to go into the medical profession, if you're interested in solving medical problems, it's not a bad first call to train to be a traditional doctor, because that's still the best way to find out about what the art of medicine is all about. But later in life, with that domain expertise, to be willing to move, as I said, in lateral directions, perhaps into roles or jobs that might have been that might not have been the sorts of things that people might have done a few decades ago. So that would be my advice. Start off in the traditional way to learn the domain expertise, but then as you move through your career, to be far more open-minded about moving laterally into different roles. Sorry, is that your son there? Is that who you? I should have been addressing you. I'm sorry. I was addressing your dad. There we go.
Yes, I would start by saying that everyone knows that education is a right, but the reality is that education is a privilege. Whatever you're getting in education, you're privileged, because I know already of millions who would be in your shoes right now, would love to be in your shoes, getting some kind of education. Yes, it may not be Harvard, it may not be Cambridge, it may not be Oxford, but you're so much better off than so many other people. So that's number one. So let's be clear that Your parents have brought you to this point, and you're very lucky. So now what next? I would give you the same advice I gave to 3 of my boys, and they're about the same age as you are. And that advice is, do so well when you think that this is a privilege, work hard, take university serious, audit classes in different subjects, so go sit on classes even if it's not in your curriculum, make the most of this experience. But then when you're ready to go to work, there's only one thing that you should be doing, and that is internships. Do 20 internships. Go try working in a legal office, even if you don't have a law degree. Just go there and see what they're doing. Work for a charity. Work for a volunteering organization. Work for a bank. Just to see what it means these jobs are really. All my children, and I tell you, I don't want to even mention the fees, they exhausted me. But at the end of the day, I told them, don't think you're going to get a job. They each went to a very good school. They had a good undergraduate university, and they did their masters. Some of them have 2 masters. And I told them that means nothing. When you go, you have an internship, you grab it, and you work and prove yourself. That's how you get jobs. Really get in there and show what you can do in reality, and make relationships and nurture these relationships. Then you build your profile, then you can move around and decide, actually that makes better, this, so on. And then make contacts with people you want as mentors. So if you feel someone in an area is a good lawyer, then make a contact with this person, follow them. If someone is a really good doctor, follow them. Someone is a good speaker, follow them. You will definitely learn more. That would be my advice.
Дмитрий? Можно на русском, Дмитрий, чтобы...
Хорошо, давайте по-русски. Да, чтобы у меня просто перевод не шел в ухо. Во-первых, это, мне кажется, очень хороший комментарий. У нас так получилось, что такая заочная дискуссия с Салахом. И мне кажется, что ситуация, в которой отец в присутствии сына задает вопрос 6 умным людям, кем быть моему сыну, это очень хорошая иллюстрация того, насколько в обществе сформирован, в традиционных институтах общества, как семья, сформирован запрос на критическое мышление. Понимаете, зачем критическое мышление моему сыну, если есть 6 человек, которые сейчас ему расскажут, кем ему быть? Вот. Это, во-первых, такой комментарий. Во-вторых, конечно, здесь уже все самое важное сказали. Необходимо пробовать как можно больше разного и как можно раньше. Надо не бояться бросать. То есть нужно точно понимать, что карьера поменяется еще 5 раз, и надо просто быть готовым к тому, что многие вещи нужно бросать. Нужно не ездить на мертвой лошади. И последнее, наверное, самое важное, такое мотивирующее, это то, что согласно всем исследованиям, люди, которые нашли свое дело, вот прямо там, где у них энергия, там, где они горят, у них в среднем по рынку зарплата на 20% выше, чем у всех остальных. Вот. И это не важно в какой сфере, при том, что мы видим, что сегодня специалисты в инженерии, самые разные, в том числе и о которой говорилось, они супер востребованы на рынке, хороших специалистов не найти. Экономистов вагон, а вот с инженерами проблема, но при этом если в инженеру не хочется и там, не знаю, по каким-то причинам не получается, можно попробовать поискать какие-то смежные направления, но еще раз, очень важно вот эта насмотренность и напробованность. Это ровно то, про что Салах говорил передо мной. Спасибо.
Tanmay, just a quick one, because we have about 10 minutes left and we have more questions from the audience. Yeah, go ahead, Tanmay.
I mean, really, personally, I think I'm not exactly I'm not exactly in the best position to answer this question myself. I mean, I'm 17 years old. I mean, I just graduated high school. I've been I've had the opportunity to work, for companies, IBM, Google, working with them rather on lots of different projects. Personally, I'm taking a look at, for example, doing a master's in a technical field, like for example in machine learning. But really, what I would like to do is sort of reiterate, particularly a couple points that I think are important. Like for example, what Daniel mentioned about being able to work across different domains and different sort of careers laterally, I think is really important. I mean, personally, I've been working towards not only, what is sort of my core passion of like developing technology and innovating from that technical standpoint, but also, creating educational resources for developers, doing, keynotes and talks to enable people to understand generally, what AI and what sort of technology's impact is on their life. And as Dr. Salah mentioned, getting experience working in different fields, doing internships, this is absolutely critical. That's something that I've been doing personally, again, is trying to get as much experience as possible across practically any opportunity in any domain. So I think those are really key pieces of advice. And while as of right now, I don't think I'm in the best position to answer your question and sort of give your son advice on what he should be doing. I hopefully that's helpful, and I think a lot of the points on this panel are really do make a lot of sense.
Thank you, Tanmay. Well, yeah, you're very, very lucky today. I mean, you have top 5 world experts giving you a personal advice, and we'll have a chat later on. So I'll give you, in order to save time, I'll give you mine, like more personally. Right. Well, you see, like great minds think alike. We have another question. Yeah, we have about 8 minutes left, so let's keep it short. Yeah.
Yes. Я спрошу по-русски.
Yeah,
I want to ask you in Russian, please. Я являюсь специалистом из области маркетинговых коммуникаций, и когда я анализировала свой карьерный успех, я пришла к выводу, что самое большое влияние на меня оказали преподаватели практики, у которых я обучалась. И когда я уже получила достаточно много личного практического опыта, я решила отдать дань студентам и приняла приглашение от государственного вуза делиться собственными знаниями. Вопрос по теме вот этого разрыва между академическим образованием и запросов студентов в реальных, практических, актуальных знаниях, навыках, которые им так нужны на рынке. Я столкнулась со следующей проблемой. С одной стороны, я обладаю огромным количеством практических знаний, как и многие мои коллеги, и мы готовы активно ими делиться в государственных вузах. С другой стороны, у государственных вузов очень высокие требования к научной степени преподавателей-практиков, для того, чтобы мы имели возможность не просто на гостевых лекциях делиться какими-то маленькими аспектами, а входить в программу образовательную, не просто быть ассистентами, а быть полноценными лекторами на дисциплинах, в которых мы разбираемся. В чем заключается мой вопрос? У вас богатый опыт, вы, полагаю, и преподавали, и преподаете в огромном количестве вузов и так далее. Как обстоят дела у вас в ваших странах, и как вам лично удавалось выходить в государственных вузах для обучения студентов как практики на более высоком уровне, то есть входить в эти программы и их менять. И последнее, что скажу, что лично для себя я нашла ответ в этой проблеме в теории поколения. Верите ли вы в нее? Я вижу, что, скажем так, в государственных вузах реальные решения принимаются, людьми, скажем так, за 50 порой. И консервативный взгляд, да, на то, как должны мы обучать студентов, даже к терминам, которые мы используем, привел к тому, что мы очень много спорили. В итоге я уволилась из вуза, а мои студенты, сожалея об этом, говорили о том, что как жаль, была надежда, что мы хотя бы сможем с помощью вас узнавать, как обстоят дела на рынке. Благодарю вас, будет очень интересно ваше мнение.
У вас даже целых 3 сразу вопроса.
На что сможете, да, ответить?
3-in-1 questions. But do you want me to summarize that? Because we have about 5 minutes left.
Well, I might just jump in and
really
just,
quick.
I mean, just a quick response, which is that the problem you're identifying about the conservatism of different educational institutions and a preference for those with particular types of background, that is not a problem that is unique to the institutions that you're interacting with. You know, our universities are, you know, some of them are some of our oldest institutions. You know, the one that I teach at is hundreds of years old. Inevitably with that comes a conservatism, and it's been a challenge for me too in straddling both the academic world, which has a particular way of doing things, but also the practical world, which also has a different way of doing things, and it's a tension I engage with as well. So it's I think the challenge you've identified is more widespread than just the institutions that you're interacting with. And it's a challenge for many people who are interested in both academia and also interested in applying those ideas in practice too.
But is there any way to solve it? Think of Oxford, 800 years of history, colleges.
Yeah. And so you can see these institutions adapting to try and solve it. So the rise of public policy schools, for instance, that give people who are interested both in, you know, the sort of the academic side of policy and policy issues, but also, you know, coming up with policy ideas that are actually going to be able to be used in practice to make improvements. Or, you know, business schools. It's another example of an institution that's trying to bring people in who are both interested in academia and also in practice. So you do see in certain parts of the universities movement in that direction, but it's a tension. I think it's a productive tension. I think it's quite a good tension to have these people from different worlds, you know, competing with each other, interacting with each other. But if it's too conservative and it's too difficult for people without those backgrounds to get involved, then I do think that's a problem.
We have about 2-3 minutes left, but I'll have to ask 2-3 more minutes. Dr. Salah, yeah, you're like kind of a come from academic world. Really briefly.
Right. Well, my advice to you is actually do two things. One is this happens in Harvard or any of the leading universities. They usually bring in experts who do not have academic, you know, like PhD or above qualifications. So if you find a number of professors, not through university direct, and build relations with a number of business professors or marketing professors, and you start coming in, instead of teaching a whole curriculum or a whole course, but coming into classes, if you like to teach, because I can see you have a passion for teaching. So if that's something you like, then it may be a good thing to cooperate with a business professor, and just they would invite you as a lecturer in some of the issues that need practical experience. And then they can continue with their class. So that's one issue. Of course, the other one, which is slightly more dramatic, is actually you start pumping up your qualifications. So if you want to teach, if this is something that you're really passionate about, then get the qualification needed to have this not being something that you lack. But so you have your academic, you have your practical experience, and you bring it up with academic qualifications that give you these. And those would be my two simple advice for you. I hope it helps.
Perttu?
Yes, and as a general reminder, I guess, at the end of the session, I would remind everybody that over than half of the population around the world is under 30. And in a couple of years, over the half of the population have been born in the 21st century. So in 10 years, 15 years, they're overrepresented in the work life. So it is very probable that their ideas, thoughts, values will direct or give the direction where we will go from now on. So it should be, you know, certain that we need to hear them more and we need to understand their point of views more. So just let's keep in mind that over half of the population is under 30.
Dmitry? And let's just,
Yes, actually, it's a very important question, but it seems to me it requires a standalone session for it. As a practical advice, I would suppose that if you want to return your debts to your teachers, then you can easily in every country, I believe, in Myanmar, in Kazakhstan, in Russia. They didn't hear where are you from, but you can find a university. It can be a private university, it can be not state, but I believe that there are state universities as well who are hunting for people from the market with market experience. So for me, it seems quite obvious that you can find an opportunity. So just you have it. So just best luck for that.
Keep searching. Right. And Tanmay, just a quick thought from you, and I'll have to wrap it up. Yeah.
Absolutely. Just really quickly to mention, this is definitely a problem that I've seen, but I will say that from my own experience, I've seen this changing. So as an example, as of around 2 years ago, there's a new university in Japan called iUniversity, and I've already been sort of onboarded as a visiting professor at iUniversity. For technology concepts like computer science and machine learning, and I feel like this is something that's starting to change, that I've seen from my own experience. But as to how we can get it to change at larger scales, and how we can get practitioners like yourself to actually teach in these sorts of universities and sort of share your experience with students is something that again, as Dmitry mentioned, requires an entire sort of standalone session.
Thank you, Tanmay. Well, we have to conclude and wrap it up. I'd like to thank all the experts today for your excellent in-depth commentaries, for your in-depth insights on the issue. Critical thinking is important, as we understand. So basically, the three major conclusions that I've made up for myself today. One, education is important. It is the key component in this big problem with technology influencing labor market and employment. And the paradigm has to change. I mean, there just should be a big international, not only regional, not only national, but an international attempt and search for new model. What are the parameters of this new model? The boundaries of these new models are to be, we need to launch big academic discussion, but also practical discussion. And hopefully, audience today will participate, and this kind of discussion will start to launch here in Kazakhstan as well. Number two, skills are important, but the question of why is more important. Do we really learn, as our expert from Finland really focused us, are we really moving in right direction? Are we succeeding in something right? Or where failure might be a good option for not succeeding in what is not right. And number three, we really need to rethink how we deal with the problems on a more philosophical level. And I thank you, Dmitry, for bringing this issue up to us. What it takes to be human. And does this technology, like an avalanche, technological avalanche, will really help us to better understand ourselves, our human nature? It's so interesting. And with first industrial revolutions that started about 200 years ago, we didn't think much about human. We shifted the pendulum example that Dmitry gave. We shifted towards technology. Maybe it's time to look back to where we started, to our human side, to our human nature, to creativity, to critical thinking, to what makes us gives us true competitive advantages. So these are the critical issues which were raised today. Thank you very much, and we'd like to go on for next session.